Hi, my name is Daniel Altschuler. I'm a tutorial fellow at Jesus College and a lecturer at Brasenose, and I'm also a faculty member, an associate professor of semantics in the Faculty of Linguistics, Philology, and Phonetics.
Hi, my name is Sandra Paoli. I'm a tutor at Balliol College, and I am a member of the faculty in linguistics, and I specialize in the Romance languages.
Wonderful. And the way that we'll proceed today is we're going to say a little bit about our program, and we'll talk about the structure and the format of the interview, what students can expect when they interview for the course. And we generally interview two types of tracks. One is philosophy, psychology, and linguistics, PPL, and another one is modern languages and linguistics, or MLL. And the way usually that, in my experience, we've been interviewing is we have two sorts of data sets that we often look at. One sort of a data set that we'll see in a real live interview in a bit involves analyzing data that a student hasn't had exposure with. That gets us to think about various analytical skills and reasoning through an unfamiliar language. And the second kind of a question that one might expect is a little bit more open-ended. So as a professor of semantics, I like to invite the student to think about different aspects of meaning that various expressions can have. But the second question is often more can vary in various different respects. We've had examples to where we analyze humor and jokes and thinking about what about the linguistic expression makes something funny. And so students can just generally expect to have a back and forth thinking about various aspects of linguistic expressions.
Yeah, Daniel, that's really important. You've actually hit on a couple of keywords there. So data that the students haven't seen yet, they're not familiar with. And I think this is part of what makes linguistics, to my mind anyway, a really interesting degree, because we're not expecting students to turn up and already know lots of things about language. So looking at a set of data that they haven't seen before, it's a way of kind of tapping into the way they navigate the data, and also in the way they pick up on things and notice and spot patterns that are there. But we're not expecting them to turn up and use specific vocabulary or display certain knowledge that we don't believe they would have got from school. So kind of this yeah. So this kind of leads us into kind of linking, the importance of the interview, because of course, not having done linguistics before at school, the interview really is crucial for them to sort of show us, their aptitude towards analyzing language, or their interest in doing it.
Right. And I think linguistics is unique in that respect because there aren't typically A levels in linguistics, or students that are coming outside of the UK might not have had a lot of exposure to linguistics. So, really, what we're looking for is we imagine that someone loves language. We want to see passion and the ability to think critically and analytically about language, being able to identify patterns. And some of the things that I know, as we've done interviews before, that we like to assess is also coachability. So the sort of questions
Yes.
that we purposefully make up are not easy. They
Mm.
require someone to think outside the box. There might be certain questions that they're not don't couldn't possibly have any exposure with, not only in terms of the language, but the sort of questions that we're asking. So we don't have expectations for someone to give the right answer, or really even to figure it out. What we're really looking for someone is how they can talk through some very difficult sorts of problems and then take advice. Is someone able to take advice and then take it to a different sort of a level, are able to identify a new pattern with the sort of advice that we have? What are some other things that you look forward when assessing?
To me, what really matters is that kind of almost undefinable spark that you see in the student when they engage with a puzzle, a language puzzle. Um, the willingness to really put themselves out there, to engage with the data, to be willing to say something, even, something that could be perhaps defined as a mistake, right? But then being willing to engage with that mistake and take advice and take, the kind of conversation extract the useful bits from a conversation and then apply that knowledge and revise their view. So coachability, as you say, I think it's really important. For me, it's that spark of interest. You see them, they light up. They enjoy the challenge. I think that says a lot about how a student is likely to engage with the course itself, because I mean, ultimately, there will be an awful lot of data analysis and, in their classes, in their tutorials, in their small group teaching. So that for me is that, and also a willingness to put themselves out there, just go for it. It feels like this, I'm just going to say it. And I think I find that quite precious.
Yeah, and I think it's important in putting oneself out there to acknowledge that there might be multiple sorts of routes and analytical options out there, right? And that's, I think, another thing that we'd love to highlight, that
Mm,
we love the students for them to talk out the different sorts of options. I'm thinking that the way to analyze this could be A, B, or C. And I'd love to tell you a little bit about what I'm thinking in terms of A, B, and C, right? I'm actually not sure which of those options is best, but if I had more examples of this sort, or if I had more information, then maybe I could discriminate between these three different options, right? And that's kind of where we could come in and help out, right? And it's a sort of
mhm.
conversation that really mirrors what the sort of tutorials would be like, right?
Yeah,
Ultimately, we're seeing and imagining what would it be like for you to sit in our office and engage with other students, be part of our community, right? And we do have a group learning environment in many of the things that we experience. So again, it's that
yeah,
conversation, being humble to admit that certain things might be difficult or there's a lack of knowledge. Again, that's something that we expect. One couldn't possibly come in into these interviews and know everything, and we know that going ahead of time. Um,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so another thing that I think is important to kind of highlight is we do, I think, try to generalize our interviews to where, regardless of which course a student is applying, whether it's MLL or PPL, at the end of the day, I think, wouldn't you agree that many of the things that we just highlighted, we'd be looking for very similar sorts of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So generally speaking, if you have a student who is applying for the combination of modern languages and linguistics, they have developed an interest in language through study of a foreign language for them. The people who come here applying for psychology, philosophy, sorry, and linguistics, it's somebody who perhaps has had more an exposure to maybe more of a scientific aspect, so maybe more maths or, psychology itself. And so perhaps they will be more interested in the sort of more abstract patterns. But generally speaking, it's exactly the same set of skills that we will be trying to kind of assess in both kind of type of candidates.
Right. And it's important to also acknowledge that because these are combined courses, there will be interviews also. So a PPL student has a choice of choosing, if they chose linguistics as one of their courses that they want to pursue, they'll choose either psychology or philosophy, and there'll be a further interview in psychology or philosophy, and similar with the modern language that they choose. So yeah, so the sort of interviews that we provide for linguistics are supposed to be comprehensive, respective of the course that they choose, knowing that there'll be also further interviews in the other courses that they choose. Um, One thing that also might be worth talking a little bit about is whether there's a difference in the interviews between the different colleges, or in general, how depending on the college, how would the courses be pursued? And I guess I'll start off by just noting that, as I said a little bit, the one difference might be that, for example, as a semanticist, oftentimes there might be certain questions that I might draw on my personal experience. And so to some extent, each interview, depending on who's interviewing, might be slightly different. But I think for the most part, the sort of things that we're looking for and the sort of questions that we're asking really go quite a bit across the colleges. And as a faculty, we discuss and kind of have ideas for different things that we're looking for.
I, I definitely share that. I think that inevitably there will be a little element of, difference between different colleges. I mean, after all, they are different entities, right? So each college will have their own attitude, um, their own practice of interview or the things they prefer, but you will have an element of subjectivity when it comes to what kind of questions are being asked. And as you say, you tap into your own expertise. But generally speaking, I think the set of skills, I think it will be the same across colleges. So, you know, an interest in working with language. And something we haven't mentioned is curiosity towards facts of language. You know, you really want to know the answer of something. It's not just, oh, here we go, another set of data, but you really want to know. So those are things that I think will just applies across all colleges.
Right. And I think kind of as this rounding up of thinking about the expectations and knowledge that we have of the applicant, I do want to underscore again that we're not looking for someone to show certain prior knowledge that they have in linguistics, because again, this is a very unique course where for many people, we're really teaching linguistics for the first time and something that their exposure. So the goal of the interview is not for the student, we don't have expectations for them to come in and, let's say, show off the prior knowledge and things that they've read and thought about. The sort of way that we really structure is we want the student to feel comfortable in analyzing data and really thinking about data as they work with us back and forth. And so the sort of general expectations and knowledge is to be yourself, to be curious, to be interested, to kind of talk about what it is that you're thinking about with us in real time, right? And I think kind of just allowing yourself to be yourself and to show why it is that you're interested in languages through the analysis and the exercises that we put forth really places someone in a wonderful context to be able to engage properly.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth underscoring, Daniel, if I may, just once more, that we're not looking for the full package, like the finished product. We want to see potential. So even if during the discussion of the data set, you know, there might be a feeling that perhaps the student hasn't really got what the purpose or the pattern that, you know, was there to spot, but is willing to engage in the conversation of, you know, what is it that caught my attention? And this is my mental process. This is how I thought about the data. That in itself is so precious. The actual right or wrong answer does not matter. It's more, you know, to be able to engage with the data and show the process that they've gone through in their minds.
Hi, very nice to meet you. My name is Daniel Altschuler. I'm a tutorial fellow at Jesus College, and it's an honor to be joined by Professor Sandra Paoli from Balliol. And welcome. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you.
Awesome. So the way that this interview will proceed is that it'll have two different parts. First, we'll begin with an analysis that Sandra Paoli will carry forward, and then after that, we'll come and do the second part of the interview with me. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds all right, thank you.
Awesome.
Brilliant.
Then I'll hand it over to Professor Paoli.
Emerald, before we begin, just in case, if there are any technical problems, we'll try and sort them out here and now. We've got some technical assistance with us. If it happens that they can't be sorted out, don't worry about a thing. We'll try and reschedule the interview. Does
All
that
right, thank
sound
you.
good? Also, we will start with questions for you, but remember at the end is always time for you to ask any questions that you may have, or indeed if there was anything that you really wanted to say in the interview and you didn't get the chance, that will be it.
All right, thank
Is
you.
that okay? So, Emerald, for this task, it would be very helpful if you had access to a pencil or a pen and a piece of paper. Do you have that with you?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Brilliant. So I'm going to share my screen now, and I will show you a set of data from a language that I don't think you've seen before. Can you see that?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, so these are some sentences from a language that you have probably not seen before. It's Nepali. And we will start with the sort of table that you have there under data. You have 1 to 7 sentences. In the right-hand side column, you've got the English translation. In the left-hand side column, you've got the Nepali itself. So what I would like you to do, I would like you to take a couple of minutes just to look at the data and try to figure out the sort of meaning or function of each of the forms that you see. So if we start now, we'll give it about 2 minutes. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Right, we've had our 2 minutes. They go past They go really fast, don't they?
Yeah.
Not to worry. Okay, so Emerald, let's see what you've got so far.
Okay. Okay, so I started with things that appear in every sentence. Because first I thought only child did, but then I realized C's also does. So now I think either child, so I think either Nani is child, or I don't know how to say this properly, but Dekche is child, or C's of the two. But then I think that maybe Nani is potentially, because I think that Kukur is dog, because that appears in the last 4 sentences, and so does that word. And in sentence 4, Kukur is accompanied with lie, which I think might be a modifier. And Nani also appears with that. So then, to me, that suggests that they would both be nouns.
Right, okay, there's an awful lot going on here, and you're absolutely right. You need to check for the sort of permutations of that particular word across the data set. So there is one element in the sentence that always remains the same. So you were saying every sentence has got child, that is true, but as you see from the translations, in some, child is the subject, so it's what sort of does the seeing, if you like, and in 2, it's actually what is being seen, it's the object. But there's one thing that never ever changes, and what is that?
I guess the verb will be the thing that's consistent. Yeah.
Yeah, and so which is the thing in the data set you have in front of you which actually is consistent throughout, not just in terms of the form that it has, but also the position?
So that would be Dekche. I'd say it like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I share that. I think that is definitely that, we've got good solid indication to tell us that that is the verb. Fantastic. Then when you were telling me about what you noticed in the data, you brought up this kukur and kukurlai. So we've got 2 forms for what seems to be the same word, dog.
Yeah.
So where do you see the 2 forms then?
So in 4, it's kukulai. In 5 as well.
Yeah.
Then in 6 and 7, it's kukur. Oh,
Right.
and that is, oh, sorry.
No, carry on.
I was just gonna say, seems to co-occur with the position of the, like, as in subject or object. So when it's the object, then it has the lie. Then when it's the subject, it doesn't. If that's right.
That's interesting. I like that. Okay, so there is a possibility. So we have a hypothesis here that it is real possible that this lie at the end, you put it on when the noun is an object, right? So
Yeah.
it's, here, for example, in 4, the dog is the thing that is being seen.
Yeah.
Okay, so if that is the case then, and you see both lie on the dog and on the child,
Mm-hmm.
I then ask you, if you look at the sentences in 1 and 2,
Yeah.
we also have an object right there, right? So we have a house that's being seen and the big book
Yes.
that is being seen. So why do you think we don't have a lie on those?
Well, the house and the big book are both inanimate objects. So I guess maybe they can't see anything, so you don't need the suffix to, like, express that they are the object, because it's obvious from the context. But then with the dog and the child, they could both be seeing. So you would need that to modify it to make it clear.
I think that makes a lot of sense, right? So whenever we have an animate element, it's important to make sure that it's super clear whether it's a subject or the object.
Yeah.
Absolutely fabulous. Thank you. Let's have a look at some more words. What about in 2 and 4? What's that yo word at the very beginning?
So I would suggest that that's this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. And what's the word for the then? In 1 and 3, the child, the house, the big book.
I mean, I don't know if they have a word for the. It doesn't seem that they do.
You're right. It doesn't seem like they do because we have nanny, which, by now we've figured out it means child. We've
Yeah.
got the word for the verb. And what about ger there in one?
That would be house.
Okay, so with that knowledge now, we've already established. Have a look at, for example, the English translation in two. You've got an adjective there, big book.
Yeah.
What do you think that word is in the Nepali sentence?
Thulo, so the third word, yeah.
Yeah, and does it appear before or after book?
Book was kitab. Before, yeah.
Before, yeah, that's interesting. Okay, that's absolutely brilliant. Okay, so have we got time to ask a couple of more questions, Daniel? Am I? Yeah?
Yeah, I think there's time for maybe another question and a half.
Yeah, fantastic. So if let's go back to the data set so I can see it myself. Yes, let's, Emerald, take a look at the question in D. In fact, there are three questions. Let's look at A and B.
Okay.
So, we have a minimal pair in the data set. Like if you look at sentences 4 and 7, you've got your nanny and tio rato kukur.
Yeah.
So, and if you look at the translation, your comes out as this and tio comes out as that.
Yeah.
So the question for you is now, if here is yaha, what do you think there might be in Nepali?
I mean, it could just have a T before it.
It could indeed.
Yeah.
And how do you think that is going to work? Oh, I should say, how do you think that T then, how did you come to the conclusion that that T could be the what you would need to have it there? What did you base that kind of hypothesis on?
So I guess that would be the difference between this and that is the presence of the T. And if you say this is like the closer one, like the one right there, and then that's the further one, then if you use that same relationship, here would be the closer one. So there be the further one.
Absolutely. I think that makes beautiful sense. Okay, I think we're done here. So thank you, Emerald.
And thank you, Emerald and Sandra, to both of you. I feel like now I know a lot more about Nepali than I had coming in. We're now going to move to another language, Emerald. How is English?
Sometimes more difficult. We'll see.
Yeah, it can be, right? But we are going to now talk about the language we're a little bit both more familiar with. And I want to do an exercise on adjectives. So
Okay.
before we begin, let me just kind of get the ball rolling a little bit by asking you, what do you think is the sort of semantic function of adjectives? And by that I mean, why do you think we even have adjectives in the language? What's their purpose?
Well, I guess the base definition is to describe nouns. And I guess the purpose of describing nouns is sometimes to differentiate between objects. So like the big and small, the big one, the small one, like that. It helps to know which one. And yeah, so I think that was like the main reason to differentiate between things. And then also just to be able to describe the world in a way that everyone can understand.
Yeah, and so here's my favorite kind of definition with the little typo that I just got rid of. And it says adjectives are expressions that alter, clarify, or adjust the meaning contributions of nouns, right? Pretty much exactly kind of how you thought about it. And I want you to kind of have this hold this close to your heart as we start to investigate a little bit about how different adjectives might differ, okay? And so the way that we'll do that, and we'll begin with the first kind of piece of data, we'll think about the adjective hairy. Okay, so I'm going to give you a kind of an argument and tell me what you think. All right.
Okay.
Roger is a hairy rabbit. Roger is my pet. Therefore, Roger is my hairy pet. What do you think? Do you think that this is a valid argument? If A and B are true, do you think C follows?
Um, kind of. Like I feel like it slightly doesn't, but I don't really know why. Like I
Uh-huh.
think you could say that it's the case.
Uh-huh.
Um,
So let's say that it is, and then maybe we could come back to this intuition that it might not. And I am really curious to hear more about that. But for the
okay.
time being, let's assume that it does. What do you think we learn about the meaning of hairy, right? So in A, we say it's a hairy rabbit, but in B, we just say that it's my pet, right? Or it's Roger's pet. It says nothing about whether the pet is hairy or not. But lo and
Mhm.
behold, when we get to C, we kind of conclude that. So what do we learn about hairy? What do you think?
So I guess it's an adjective that can be used to describe a rabbit, and then also as a rabbit is a subset of a pet, can be extended to also the pet.
Yeah, interesting. And the notion of a subset, right? Kind of this mathematical notion seems to play kind of an important role here, right? That we're describing a particular kind of an object, namely a rabbit, right? And saying something of that. Then there's a certain kind of relationship to the fact that if the rabbit is my pet, then also follows that they must be hairy. Okay, I want you
Yeah.
to hold this idea, like as you nicely expressed of subset, to think about a different sort of an adjective. So let's think about talented, right? So imagine I tell you, Alice is a talented violinist. Alice is my surgeon. Can I therefore conclude that Alice is my talented surgeon?
No.
Okay, so why not? Can you kind of give a context that would show that this is an invalid argument? And then the sort of second question is, how is talented and hairy different then?
Um. So Alice could be a really good violinist, but just not be a very good surgeon. Um. Yeah.
Nice. She might be still the medical student, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Um.
But
So,
great. But then, I mean, so we could kind of come back to your initial intuition, right? You're like, I think it's a valid argument, but there's also a sense, I think, when you could maybe understand Harry that would still maybe not make it such. But nevertheless, this intuition that this is a valid argument is much stronger than for talented, right? So
yeah.
why do you think that is? And what do you think we could learn from kind of the difference between talented and Harry?
Um. So talented only describes a specific adjective that it's supposed, sorry, specific noun that it's supposed to describe, or that it has described in the sentence given. So you can't, I guess, apply it to anything. So like with Harry, um, Harry describes the rabbit slash pet as a whole, so he can extend it. Whereas with talented, it describes Alice in a particular capability, and that doesn't extend to everything.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's awesome. Right. And kind of thinking it back to this term of thinking about this as being having something to do with sets and subsets, right? Any idea what we could say about talented then? So do you think that then in a way that doesn't seem like subset could apply here, right?
Yeah, yeah. Unless if like, because I was thinking maybe if it was like Alice is a talented musician, and then you said she's a talented violinist, then a
Mhm.
violinist is, I guess, a subset of a musician. But then because of that's also kind of an assumption because there's loads of ways you can be a musician. So if there
Yeah.
was actually a subset where violinist was like clearly inside the subset of another noun, then maybe. But
Uh-huh.
yeah,
Yeah, awesome. Awesome.
yeah.
Great. So let me give you a couple of other adjectives, and I'll give you kind of 30 seconds to think about these. And what I just want to know is whether you think they differ in any way, like from talented or hairy, or do you think they're similar in some sense? What do you think we could learn about these? So I'll read these out loud for you. Ava is a former senator. Smith is an alleged murderer. Again, with a typo. And I have 1 million pounds worth of counterfeit money. What do you think about these three adjectives? And spend just a little bit of time thinking this through. Do any of these in particular jump out at you? What do you think?
I'd say the last one probably the most, because I think it's kind of similar for all of them, but especially the last one. The adjective is invalidating the information given by the noun, basically. And like with alleged, it's kind of similar. It's like it's not definite, which is not the same, but like similar. And then with former, it's like they were, but they're not anymore. But with counterfeit, it's like there just isn't, basically. So it's like the strongest version of like an adjective that invalidates the noun.
Yeah, really cool. And I like how you're keeping really kind of with our original definition of like, how does it adjust the meaning contribution of a noun, right? Well, counterfeit money sounds like, well, it's no longer money, right? And if I'm hearing you right, alleged murder, we actually don't know. It's something about our knowledge. And then the former really has to do with our time. And just as a quick follow-up, if this isn't money, how do we make sense of this sentence? What does it mean to have 1 million pounds worth of counterfeit money? What could that possibly mean? What do you think?
Well, I guess it's something that looks a lot like money,
Uh-huh.
but doesn't have the necessary characteristics to make it valuable as money.
Uh-huh. Or I guess maybe another way of thinking about it possibly is counterfeit money maybe doesn't have the actual bit, but it's still maybe made of paper, other things, and you have, I don't know, so much of it that it's actually like 1 million pounds worth of that paper.
Yes, yeah,
Also, yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So it's a curious sentence, right? It could also be kind of like paradoxical, right? Yeah. All right. And then as the very final question, just curious what you think of this dialogue and whether we could learn something about the adjective yummy. So imagine Sam says, "This sushi is yummy." And Sasha says, no, it's not. Do you think that they have really means to argue with each other? So is yummy something that is could be established as such? So is only one of them right, or could they both be right? What do you think? What's your intuition? And then based on that intuition, what do we learn about adjectives, right? So to kind of remind you, right? If I say Roger is a hairy pet, rabbit, or a hairy pet, either is or isn't, right? Either Alice is a talented violinist or she isn't. Either Ava is a former senator or is not, right? Either something's counterfeit or not. But what about yummy, and what can we learn about this?
Well, I don't know. Going back to the summary that you've given, I feel like particularly maybe talented is also a bit subjective, which is what I'm gonna say about yummy. Like, I think counterfeit is definitely like either it is actual money or isn't. But like, and
Uh-huh.
there's like things you know about counterfeit money that you could use to test that. But with yummy, like that's an opinion, and I think talented could also be an opinion. Like, I mean, if Alice performed and she like messed up really badly and the violin was like squeaking, then like you might say she's not talented. But if you'd seen her the week before and she did a really good concert, then you'd be like, Alice is talented, she just messed up. I don't know. So like, yeah, talented is also complicated. And I think yummy is complicated as well because it's an opinion. So Sam can think it's yummy, Sasha can think it's not. And they can both be right in that they're allowed to have opinions.
What
Um,
about Harry? Do you think Harry works a different way? And I wanted to make sure that you can voice your original kind of insight. So to go full circle, where you were like, yeah, I could see that this is a valid argument. But do you think we could kind of extend your argument even further to something like Harry? Do you think that's a kind of objective state or not? Is that something that one could argue, whether a rabbit is hairy or whether a pet is hairy?
um, I think there's like a threshold of hairiness for like I don't know for most things, and I think some people might think it's different. But then I also think like I don't know if you're like if you know a lot about rabbits and you see like you and, like, yeah you've seen enough rabbits to know like that's an objectively very hairy rabbit, then yeah. But like I don't, so I feel like I could just see a rabbit that's like a bit hairy and be like that's a hairy rabbit. Someone else be like no, like that's low level hairy. I've seen so much worse. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. And I hope you've enjoyed this sort of exercise to see how, on the one hand, yes, adjectives change kind of the meanings of the nouns. They may alter in different ways, right? But like once you kind of get into the nitty gritty, right, there's quite a bit of difference, and it requires some thought to truly understand their meanings. Great. So this officially concludes the interview. But as Professor Paoli noted, we wanted to make sure that if there's certain, give you a little bit of time, if there's any questions that you have about the course, or if there's certain things that you wanted to talk about and you wish you had, but we didn't really ask you, if there's anything that you have. And again, this is not part of the interview. This is just an opportunity for you to talk and for us to talk a little bit at the end.
Okay, well, I think I'm all right. Thank you. I really enjoyed the interview, but yeah, I don't think I have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emerald. It was wonderful to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emerald. Take care and good luck with your next interviews.
Thank you.
So I thought that interview went quite well. What did you think, Sandra?
Wow. Yes. So I did too. I think there was a lot of engagement there with the data. I like the way she took her time over the data. You know, the 2 minutes she had, I know they go really fast, but she really engaged with the set of data that I was doing with her. She was in there, you know, she was following, you know, the logical steps. So she was looking for the constant elements, so the one that was there throughout. It really, I was really impressed the way she immediately spotted the, you know, the kukur pair, where you've got the dog with the ending and without the ending. Yeah, and I don't know, for my set of data, I really like also the way she engaged with the, you know, the questions that I was asking. She was really kind of focusing on what I was asking, thinking about the data and answering. So no, I mean,
Yeah.
and you could see she liked it, right?
Yeah, I think she was enjoying it. And I think that one thing I really appreciated is you asked her to talk through the process. And, instead of just saying, here's what I think, she took kind of at the very outset, right? She said, here's what my thought process, here are the two possibilities for what I think child could be. And here's kind of how I tried to figure it out, right? And I really kind of appreciated understanding exactly what she was thinking about. And it very much mirrors the sort of things that we'll be doing in tutorials and in the course, right? Again, that we're not looking for the answer. We're looking about how do you reason? What's the sort of evidence that you have, and what's the best sort of conclusion that we can draw based on that evidence? And I think that she did really well. I too also appreciated, I thought she was a very good listener, and that she took her time, right? And I think that's one of the advice that I can give, right, for future applicants to really
Yeah.
take their time, right? Yes, there is a certain amount of time pressure, but at the same time, right, where it's important to kind of give yourself a chance and think through. There's a level of focus that you could see she was really into the data that allowed her to navigate and really give herself a chance, right, to even go to some of the further questions, which might not have been part of a given interview, right? We always kind of set up to have more questions than we're probably going to ask. But because of her level of focus, right, towards the end, you even kind of thought about, okay, should we engage? Should we ask a few more questions? And I thought that was great.
Yeah, it really worked well. I agree. And you know, you and once again you said something really important there, Daniel. It's actually taking your time to look at the data. So, you know, an interview will actually offer candidates a set of data, that's for sure. We need to see them in action to be able to get a sense of, is this for them or not? And so,
Right.
you know, being able to give themselves a chance, it's really important. So take your time when you're looking at the data and yeah, sort of.
Yeah, and also we should acknowledge that Emerald is currently finishing her second year as a PPL student, so she does
Yeah.
come with much more knowledge than we would expect of an applicant, right? And this came out through a little bit in the interview, especially in the interaction when we talked about adjectives. So she used certain technical notions, for example, like subset, and she
Subset,
started to
yeah.
articulate certain semantic relationships that she learned, taking the semantics course. But that's not an expectation that we would have. And one of the things, we appreciated and saw that she was able to just talk general relationships of like, here's what it would take, here's the sort of context. And if the nouns were describing objects that, stood in this sort of relation, whether you name it as a kind of a subset or not,
It
right?
doesn't matter.
It doesn't really, really matter, right? Or, for example, in some of the data with you, we talked about, subjects and objects, or we talked about maybe something that would be case marking, right? But we're not expecting for someone to articulate what that would be like, right? And at any level of description is perfectly fine. Again, what we're looking for is recognition of patterns,
Mhm.
being able to articulate hypotheses and what evidence you have. It doesn't matter to us so much that you have sort of like the proper lingo, because many applicants, again, Emerald is in her second year, right, might not have developed these sorts of notions.
Absolutely. I also noticed how, we were talking earlier about coachability. I think in the interaction with us, Emerald showed to be incredibly coachable. You said she was a good listener. She was a brilliant listener. She had her she took her time to look at the data. She had her own ideas. She came, to the discussion with those ideas, and yet, she was able to take what we were sort of offering her. In my case, it was the constant element throughout. In your case, it was the comparison between different adjectives, and she took that and kind of integrated it with her own ideas and developed them further, right? And
Right.
that,
Yeah, and
yeah,
I think we saw especially that developing further in the bits about adjectives, where she even questioned some of my own assumptions, right? So towards the end, when I started to mention, well, things like talented, you either are or you aren't, right? And I wanted to contrast that with yummy, which definitely has more of a subjective flavor, right? And she even questioned, well, look,
yeah,
maybe talented is like that too, and you really kind of saw an individual start to shine, right? And if anything, I could say that she could have done even better, right? Hopefully we develop the sort of comfort where you can challenge and you can actually say, well, you know what, I humbly disagree, or here's actually what I think. And one should feel totally at ease of really expressing. You should not guess what is the right answer that we're looking for, but really have the freedom to express what you truly believe, right? And I think Emerald kind of showed that, and maybe with a little more time, or even maybe with a little bit more thought about, counterfeit and alleged and some of those adjectives, right? She could have maybe even taken it to the next level, right? But of course, there's always ways to do more and to kind of think outside the box. I think kind of what we were looking for, she definitely
yeah.
fit the bill.
Completely. And I think also, bringing in her own example. So she was giving you a scenario. She was saying, hang on a second, just like you said, talented doesn't quite work like that. And she offered you an alternative scenario. And that really shows that she was thinking about it and relating it to her knowledge of English, to her competence in English, which, yeah. So had we had more time, you could have had a research paper out on this.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah.
Are there final recommendations or advice that you'd like to give, Sandra, for applicants that will be applying to either PPL or the MLL course?
Well, I think to begin with, having the opportunity to come for an interview, it's a super thing. Being yourself, trying to engage, so live in the moment, try and shut out your fears about, oh my God, what if and what, relax. We're here to work together. So this is an opportunity to, I would say, engage, not just with the data, with the task, but with us or the interviewer that you have in front of you, and work with them. I think this is the best advice that I can give, and definitely, if you have an interest in how language works, have a go. This could be for you.
Absolutely. And with that, we wish every applicant tons of luck, and we very much look forward to interviewing. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.